Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. I hope you're all well out there. Here in the UK, the sun is starting to shine and the sky is not quite so low and grey. So naturally, I'm quite upbeat. But please, keep your messages coming over to me at techblogrider@outlook.com. Tell me where you listen to the podcast. Maybe send me a photo of what you can see wherever you're living. And allow me to live my life vicariously through you and see the world through your eye. Because one of the things I'm missing at the moment is the ability to travel and see different parts of the world and meet people. But hey, maybe we can do it through this podcast. However, today I want to explore female leadership in cybersecurity. And I have Johanna, the CEO of Strategic Security Solutions Consulting, joining me on the podcast. And she is an inspirational and dynamic female leader, not only within her company, but also for leaders and other women professionals across industries. And she is extremely active on Clubhouse, where you'll find her joining Clubhouse conversations on leaders on leadership on a daily basis. But we have so much to talk about today, and she really is a great guest, full of energy. So enough scene setting from me. Buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Atlanta in the US, where Johanna is waiting to speak with us now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. First, Neil, thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to talk to you today. My name is Johanna Baum. I am the founder and CEO of S3 Consulting. We are a cybersecurity and identity management firm. We were founded 16 years ago. And really by education, I'm an accountant, which I guess doesn't typically translate into IT security, but I really just had a love for technology and finance, and it just kind of wove me into this security background. So I've been in and around IT for about 25 years. And in addition to that, I think one of my side hustles or passion projects is really, around women in STEM. And I think when I started out, it was a little more taboo, I think, than it is now. So, a lot of my time is really spent in advocacy, in addition to just my day job with cybersecurity, is really bringing women into and keeping them in STEM careers. So I do a lot of that in my spare time, in addition to being a proud single mom of 3 crazy young children.
Wow, that's incredible. And there were so many reasons I was excited to get you on the podcast today, because you are an inspirational and dynamic female leader, not only within your company, but also for leaders and other women professionals across industries. But I've got to ask, where was it that your love of technology came from? I mean, can you remember what lit that spark and put you on the path that you're onto today? Because when you mention the world of finance, accounting and technology, I feel like there's a bit of a story there.
Yes. Yes. And I remember, ages ago, I don't even remember how old I was, but my father was taking apart a computer and he was putting in a new graphics board. And I don't even know why he was doing that. He's a scientist. And was taking apart this machine. And I was so fascinated with what it looked like and what he was doing and trying to understand, just all the parts of it. So, he asked if I wanted to help, and we did it together. And I was just enamored with this mystical machine and how it could do so much. And at the time, it's kind of humorous because I thought, this is so small. But that computer was so big compared, to the one that I'm on today. But when I went to school, we had a choice of either, now I'm going to date myself, but, shop or home ec or typing, which led you into a COBOL class. And I was the only girl in that class, but I said, I've got to see what this thing can do. So it just really, piqued my interest and started me on a path to technology.
I love that. And of course, you went on to become the CEO of Strategic Security Solutions. So can you tell me more about the company and the kind of problems that you solve for your customers, and ultimately what makes you stand out in the incredibly crowded cybersecurity market?
Right. Yeah. Especially today, it is a very crowded market. So when I had the opportunity to either really grow a practice for a firm, and I'd been, with a great firm for almost a decade. And it was really, do I grow the firm there? Or do I really, take a leap and start the firm for myself? And we were doing something so different, when it came to really the combination of people and the human side of technology. I really just wanted to take the leap and try to do it for myself. So, we started really in the application security side for SAP. It was a large behemoth of an application. So it was easy to, at the time, find work and again, really make a name for, how do we blend operations with tech and make it digestible? It's such a difficult topic when you think about cybersecurity, identity management. And we really covered the breadth of, IT cybersecurity, from incident response to, all the way through to identity. But how do I make that digestible for the business where they can consume, how do I manage, the data protection and privacy around my applications? Why am I concerned about authentication and authorization management? So we can merge that, the people process between the operations and extending that into technology to enable the business. It's something that we do really well, and something that you just don't typically see in the market. It's all tech, it's all licenses and putting in a solution and leaving. So for us, it's not just the technology, it's the people in the process behind it and making that consumable for everyone across the organization.
I completely agree with you there. And I think for everyone listening as well, I think we can all agree and expect that identity threats will increase exponentially, causing organizations to focus on prevention. But what really interests me is when I was reading about what you're doing there is how the focus is shifting from authenticating identity and authorization to actually controlling access and who can access what. So can you expand on that for me?
Sure. And, we were just talking a bit about, the pandemic and what an impact it's had on, everyone from personal to professional. I mean, we continue to talk about authentication, but a year and a half ago, we were screaming about it. And then all of a sudden the world went into, a remote worker situation where previously it was, 1 or 2% of your population, maybe even at max 10 to 20. And now you've got 100% of the global working population as, remote, where organizations weren't expecting it. So how do they shift that mindset from now, people are working from everywhere to what am I giving them access to once they're inside the organization? So, we're really trying to help shift that thinking and move them up the maturity curve to, all right, we've got to get the table stakes, the ground basics of just authenticating them in. But now what are they doing now that they're here? There's so many different populations of people that you're giving this access to. Do we really know what they're doing? So, the ability for an organization, I love this phrase, and I didn't come up with it myself. It was a colleague named Sean Gallagher. And he said, my organization just wants to stay just barely above the poverty line when it comes to cybersecurity. That was such a painful comment for me to hear, but so true. Most organizations are just not investing there. So how do we get them to really, lift above that line and think about protection from, who and what is coming into the organization? So what are they doing? That access management component is huge for them to really pay attention to.
And we will have a lot of business leaders and decision makers listening that are outside of the tech industry. So for those people, what does identity mean to you? And what are the best practices for ensuring a strong identity?
Sure. And again, you talk about identity and everybody immediately goes to the human, who is logging on. But we call it the carbon and the non-carbon. So you do have the human element and all of the populations inside who is accessing, but it's also that system to system, an API, a bot. Identity is really any and everything that comes into your organization and can either see or access data. And really, whether it's private, whether it's public, it's any of that information that you typically wouldn't grant access to. So if they're entering into that environment and the perimeter is long gone, so anyone that you're assigning those credentials to or anything that is assigned credentials is typically, and I use my air quotes, an identity within an organization.
And I'm curious, with the rise of the contactless of everything, do you think it means authentication will naturally become more complex? And assuming it is, how are you helping businesses manage challenges like that?
Sure. And I love this because, as the consumer, and especially with, having kids, Amazon is here every day. Somebody is delivering something. I want a frictionless exchange with every vendor I'm doing work with, or that I'm, personally procuring from. I want to get a hotel room without, talking to anyone. So it's between food and services. We expect that contactless activity now, and now more than ever, especially, through the last year. But how does that translate when it comes to security? I mean, we've given so much up to try to have that frictionless and contactless exchange that they've really abandoned basic security practices in some areas. And consumers aren't thinking about what security, and what security risks they've opened themselves up to for that convenience. But it's a pretty significant trade-off. So when we talk to organizations about, how they're continuing to protect information and regulatory compliance when it comes to protecting that information, either when it's gathering information from a customer, or just giving them that authorization inside the application so that, we can make ease of access so much better. It's something that we really have to continue to beat the drum on. Is I can appreciate customer experience. I want it myself, but are we still giving them that minimum level of security that they absolutely need to protect their most important assets? So we really try to focus on that. Customer service, customer experience is high, but so is the need for you to have that compliance and protection of information as well.
And something else that I wanted to address today, because we've both been in the tech industry for a long time, and I suspect that we've both been talking about the death of the password for as long as we can remember. But it does feel that enterprises are slowly shifting away from the enterprise password use and over to more secure alternatives. It's a big question, this one, but is this finally the end of the password? And how can businesses reach this utopia?
We see this all over the place now with passwordless companies popping up, and it's definitely, it is the coin or the buzzword of the day. But when you think about password, we think of password 123. Everybody's got something they're clicking into the keyboard. But whether it's that actual typing in, or it's a key, or it's a photo, it's biometrics, all of these are still on authentication mechanisms in some capacity. So, is the password dead? I mean, perhaps it's going to that utopia of me not being able to click and have data entry for a password. But that authentication of a user will always survive. How am I making sure that I'm giving some type of credential? So I would love for that clicking to be dead. But, it'll continue, especially for some of these older, more rooted, in anchor technologies. They'll always continue with that password piece. And a funny story I was thinking about the other day about Bitcoin and passwords. There's a German programmer, I think, out of San Francisco, who about 10 years ago was gifted some Bitcoin. And it ended up, I think at this point, it was worth over 220 million. And he lost the password. Oh. His digital wallet for this. It's been this, he said, and now it's a constant reminder that I don't do this work for the money, because I'm talking about, and he's a programmer. He's like, I'm talking about security and programming, and I can't get into my own digital wallet to get $220 million. So it's, at some point, there is going to be that exchange to a more, again, frictionless and utopian password enterprise, but not just yet.
Oh man, I don't know what is worse, losing your password and not accessing that 200 million. Or the guys, I don't know if you saw this, the guys about 10 years ago bought 2 Papa John pizzas, and that ended up costing $400 million by today's money too. Imagine that.
Right. Oh my gosh. IT gone wrong.
Absolutely. And you mentioned passwords, or the death of the password being a big buzzword at the minute, but there's another huge buzzword, especially in cybersecurity at the moment, which is zero trust. And for my time in IT, we traditionally, of course, trusted everything inside the network and distrusted everything outside. But zero trust is the complete opposite of that. But I'm curious, what role do you see zero trust playing in a world of hybrid working, where we're working anywhere and everywhere?
So, when we were back in the day of technology, it wasn't security first. We started it, we're just enabling the business. We're so excited we can do things faster. Then we move to, all right, trust but verify. Let's start to put some basics in here and confirm who and what we're dealing with. Now we moved into this zero trust, and you're right. You go to this hybrid environment of, and people returning to work. So I've got half the organization working from here, half from there, half from everywhere, which is three halves, more than a whole. But, with people working all over, how are we trying to manage that zero trust mantra? And all it takes is, Kevin Mitnick's social engineering experiment to have a user call up to the help desk and say, I'm having issues logging in. It takes 2 seconds because the help desk or support personnel are really incentivized by closing tickets. Their job is customer experience and closing tickets, not, am I sure that person is who they said they were? So this great zero trust mantra has now been completely, eliminated with a phone call to say, I can't get in. And whether the person is legitimate or illegitimate, now they have credentials, access to either their own or somebody else's authorizations in any number of applications, or privileged access. So I think, as we continue to try to push for that zero trust, the more that you have people in the middle of that, and trying to support and help, it starts to erode that zero trust. As zero trust deteriorates, that customer service, you've got to get that balance somewhere in between, so that you're continuing to keep above that security poverty line and making sure that you're keeping operations moving in the right level of security for the organization. It's a tough balance.
It really is. And something else I wanted to bring up, and I know you're too modest to go here, but in your own career, you are a hugely successful female leader in the world of cybersecurity, but someone who is also leading a team with a very human-centric approach in tech, which is so refreshing to hear. But are there any tips or advice you would offer to any female listeners, female leaders listening that might be just starting out, and the kind of challenges that they possibly could encounter along the way?
Yeah. First off, thank you very much. That is a very kind compliment. I love mentoring women that are either, again, getting into a STEM career or starting out on an entrepreneurial journey. It's difficult, as a mom, and then remembering my mother, who's an entrepreneur as well. She was an attorney, but started a private practice, later in her practice. And it was very interesting for me to watch her and the things that she encountered. And it wasn't something that she had ever seen before. So at least I had an eye for that. When I started doing it and I was encountering the same issues, I wondered, is anybody talking about this? So now I spend a good bit of time even on Clubhouse, just talking to women about, are you really passionate about this, or is it just a fun project? So, a lot of the advice I give is really make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tougher than tough. There are going to be a lot of people that tell you that you don't need to continue. And, naysayers at every aspect, your personal, your professional. Be really rooted in what that thing is that you're doing. Make sure that you know what it is, you're committed to it, and you're going to sacrifice for it. And it's not a few days a week. It's when your eyes are open, when your eyes are closed, you really have to be, dedicated to that. But also setting your boundaries. You have to make sure that you're keeping your commitment to keep yourself healthy, emotionally healthy. You're still in service to others, when you have the time. But it's tough. So, that's usually the biggest, piece of advice that women come back to is, well, I like it, but they're still not truly committed to it. And if you're not, then pause, wait and continue on the journey when you're really ready to get into it. But, when you have questions about that, everyone else can see it. So when you're committed to it, get on the journey and trust your gut, because it will steer you well.
And I'm curious, throughout your career, have you seen attitudes change towards women in tech and female leaders in tech as well? I mean, presumably we've made some progress. There's still a lot of work to be done, but how have you seen attitudes change?
Yeah, I always say I don't want an additional accommodation, or I don't want anything special because I'm oddly unique in IT. I just want the same opportunity that everybody else has. And I've seen it. I've seen it both ways. I've definitely seen areas where we haven't moved at all, and it's so disheartening. But then I've definitely seen areas where we've made vast improvements, and I see more women in boardrooms when I'm having conversations. Whether it's at I serve on a board for my university, and I see more women in the room having conversations about higher ed and how we can really educate youth and move our industry forward. I see the same when I go see, C-levels at our clients. There's more women in the room having these conversations. And I'm not addressed with, I guess, the confusion of why I'm there and why I'm able to talk about highly technical or then add the human element, to a conversation. So I definitely think we're moving in the right direction, but having these different platforms like Clubhouse, like LinkedIn, where people are really bringing more of the human approach back to this. And you're seeing my house today. I mean, not everybody can see that on the podcast, but you're bringing this human element, and it really humanizes women, and men, and really, I think, helps kind of propel this initiative forward a lot more than it would have in the last couple of years.
Excellent. And although this is a tech podcast, I do try and bring the human element to the show as well. And a question I always try and ask my guests is if there was a particular song that has inspired them in their past, helped them in their career, helps them get their head in the zone before going on stage, or just reminds them of their career in tech. Is there a particular song that stands out for you, and why is that?
Sure. I mean, I love music, and I usually have a daily theme song, and we change it up quite a bit in my house. But as soon as I heard this, all I could think of was The Who. In my family, my mother and father also really love music, but The Who and Who Are You? Because when I think of identity, that's the only song that runs through my head. Who are you? So it is the perfect song when you're thinking about IT, security, and identity management.
I absolutely love it. And I'm fighting the urge to do a Pete Townsend windmill with my hands.
That's exactly what, and I just kept hearing it in the back of my head. So I would not sing it to you today because I'm definitely not a great singer. But
well, as long as you can play air guitar, you'll be fine.
Exactly.
But before I let you go, can I just ask that you remind the listeners of where they can find you online? You mentioned you're quite active on Clubhouse, and also contact your team if they've got any questions.
Sure. I mean, we're always available to answer questions. s3.consulting is our web address. I am very active on LinkedIn and Clubhouse, Johanna Baum or Johanna Baum S3. Also on Twitter, same handle.
Excellent. Well, I'll add all those notes to those links to the show notes just so people can find you nice and easily. There's so much I love about what you're doing here. I always say at the end of every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. And for me, what really stands out about the great work you're doing is your human-centric approach. And it's that mixture of the two. That's where the magic happens. I think many people forget that sometimes. But more than anything, just thanks for sharing your story with me today, Johanna.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.
For me, Johanna's passion for tech and her human-centric approach to technology really shine through in our conversation today, not to mention infectious enthusiasm for the subject too. And yes, identity threats will increase exponentially, causing organisations to focus on prevention. And we are starting to see a focus in shifting from authenticating identity and authorization to actually controlling access. Because if you keep the attack contained, you still have a large issue. Identity was compromised. But increasingly, organisations are taking cybersecurity awareness training to better secure and manage user identities and scrub for inactive identities. And as for the death of the password, the jury's still out on that one, I think we can all agree on. But I would love to invite everybody listening to share your insights, expertise, views, questions, songs for the Spotify playlist, whatever it might be, by simply emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You'll get me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, @NeilCHughes. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So keep your messages coming over. And I'll join you again tomorrow, where we've got another guest from another industry. But more than anything, just thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.